Welcome to Games From Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson, and this is the third and last episode in our little series of Witch Stories by Linton. There was one story that I cut out because in the LibriVox recording, thanks to the LibriVox narrators who've provided their voices for today's episode. In the original LibriVox recording, the story took around 20 minutes, and I wanted it mostly for its Tolkien-esque twist. That is, there is a witch, a man unusually, who is taken and freely confesses, and so isn't put to the torture. Confesses all kinds of things because he says no man may kill him. Satan has promised it so. And then he eats his last meal, and he's wonderfully cheery, and they take him to his place of execution, and the executioner hasn't turned up because he's been struck down by disease, or possibly magic, and the witch says, "See, I told you so. No man may kill me." So they put him back in his cell and say, "See you tomorrow." And they go to the executioner's wife and say, "Would you like to strangle the man who's just insulted your husband?" And she readily agrees to be his executioner, and so the next day the man denounces Satan for his trickery, for saying that no man may kill him, and then he's strangled to death by a woman. Let us pass over to our last two stories, and thanks again to the readers.
Witch Stories by E. Lynn Linton. The Woman and the Bear. Read by Agnes Robert Bear. One Stephen Cooper of Ditchett, a yeoman of honest reputation, good wealth, and well beloved by his neighbours, being sick and weak, sent his wife Margaret to a farm of his in Rockington, Gloucestershire, where she remained a few days, not finding all to her liking, she said. When she returned, she found her husband somewhat better, but she herself was strange and wild, using much idle talk to him concerning an old groat, which her little son had found, and which she wanted to see, and raving about the farm in Gloucestershire, as if she had been bewitched, and knew not what she said. Then she began to change in very face, and to look on her husband with a sad and staring countenance. And one night things came to a climax, for she got very wild and bad, and shook so frightfully that they could scarce keep her down in bed. And then she began talking of a headless bear, which, she said, she had been into the town to beat away during the time of her fit, and which had followed her from Rockington. As the sequel proved was true. Her friends and husband exhorted her to prayer and patience, but she still continued marvellously holden, the devil getting quite the better of her until Sunday night, when she seemed to come to her worst. Suddenly the candle, which they had not been noticing, went out, and she set up a lamentable cry. They lighted another, but it burnt so dim that it was almost useless, and the friends and neighbours themselves began to be disquieted. Wildly and hurriedly cried Margaret, "Look! Do you not see the devil?" Herself all terrified and disturbed, they bade her be still and pray. Then said Margaret, "Well, if you see nothing now, you shall see something by and by." And forthwith they heard a noise in the street, as it had been the coming of 2 or 3 carts, and presently they in the chamber cried out, "Lord help us, what manner of thing is this that cometh here?" For up to the bedside where the woman lay, with heaving breasts and dilated eyes, came a thing like a bear, only it had no head and no tail, a thing half a yard in height and half a yard in length. No bigger, Margaret, not so big as a well-trussed man on all fours. Which, when her husband saw, he took a joined stool, and stroke at it, and the blow sounded as though it had fallen on feather-bed. But the creature took no notice of the man. It wanted only Margaret. Slowly it paddled round the bed, then smote her thrice on the feet, took her out of bed, and rolled her to and fro in the chamber, round about the floor and under the bed. The husband and friends, sore amazed and affrighted, only calling on God to assist them, not daring to lift a hand for themselves or her. And all the while the candle grew dimmer and dimmer, so that they could scarce see each other, which was what Margaret and the headless bear no doubt desired. Then the creature took her in its arms, thrust her head between her legs, so that he made her into a round ball, and so rolled her in a round compass like an hoop, through 3 other chambers, down an high pair of stairs, in the hall, where he kept her for the space of 1/4 of an hour. The people above durst not come down, but remained above, weeping pitifully and praying with loud and fervent prayer. And there was such a terrible stench in the hall, and such fiery flames darting hither and thither, that they were fain to stop their noses with clothes and napkins, expecting every moment to find that hell was opening beneath their feet, and that they would be no longer able to keep out of harm's way in the devils. Then Margaret cried out, "He is gone! Now he is gone!" And her husband joyfully bade her come up to him again, which she did, but so quickly that they greatly marvelled at it, and thought to be sure the devil had helped her. Yet she proved to be none the worse for the encounter, which was singular as times went. They then put her in bed, and 4 of them kept the clothes down, praying fervently. Suddenly the woman was got out of bed. She did not move herself by nerves, muscles, or will, of course, but she was carried out by a supernatural power, and taken to the window at the head of the bed. But whether the devil or she opened the window, the pamphlet does not determine. Then her legs were thrust out of the window, and the people heard a thing knock at her feet, as if it had been upon a tub, and they saw the great fire, and they smelt a grievous smell, and then, by the help of their prayers, they pulled Margaret into the room again, and set her upon her feet. After a few moments she cried out, "O Lord, methinks I see a little child." But they paid no heed to her. Twice or thrice she said this, and ever more earnestly, and at last they all looked out at the window, for they thought to be sure she must have some meaning for her raving. And lo, they espied a thing like unto a little child, with a bright shining countenance, casting a great light in the chamber. And then the candle, which had hitherto burnt blue and dim, came out its natural light, so that they could all see each other. Whereupon they fell to joyful prayer, and gave thanks to God for the deliverance. And Margaret Cooper was laid in her bed again, calm, smiling, and collected, never more to be troubled by a headless bear which rolled her about like a ball, or by a bright shining child looking out from the chinks of a rude magic lantern. As for the bear, I confess I think he was nearer akin to man than devil, that he was known about Rockington and Gloucestershire, and that Margaret Cooper understood the conduct of the plot from first to last. But then this is the sceptical 19th century, wherein the wiles of human cunning are more believed in than the power of the devil, or the miracles of supernaturalism. Yet this was a case which, in spite of all its fraud and folly so patently displayed, was cited as one of the most notorious and striking instances of the power of Satan over the bodies as well as the souls of those who gave themselves up to the things of the world.
Witch Stories by E. Lynn Linton. The Witch on the Plank, read by Nadine Swartz. Footnote: a most certain strange and true discovery of a witch being taken by some parliamentary forces, as she was standing on a small plank board and sailing over the river Newbury, 1643. Evidently a political matter, and perhaps with no substratum of truth in the story at all. End of footnote. Many are in a belief that this silly sex of women can by no means obtain so vile and damned a practice of sorcery and witchcraft, in regard to their illiterateness and want of learning, which many men have by great learning done. Nevertheless, the Earl of Essex and his army, marching through Newbury, saw a feat done by a woman which not the most learned man of all of them could have accomplished by natural means. 2 soldiers were loitering behind the main body, gathering nuts, blackberries, and the like, when one climbed up a tree for sport, and the other followed him, jesting. From their vantage place, looking on the river, they espied a tall, lean, slender woman treading of the water with her feet with as much ease and firmness as if one would walk or trample on the earth. The soldier called to his companion, and he to the rest, and soon they all, captains, privates, and commanders alike, saw this marvelous lean woman, who they now perceived was standing on a thin plank, which she pushed this way and that at her pleasure, making it a pastime to her, little perceiving who was on her tracks. Then she crossed the river, and the army after her, but there they lost her for a time, and when they found her, all were too cowardly to seize upon her. At last one daredevil went up and boldly caught her, demanding what she was. The poor wretch was dumb, perhaps with terror, and spoke nothing, so they dragged her before the commanders, to whom, though she was mightily urged, she did reply as little. As they could bethink themselves of nothing better to do with her, they set her upright against a mud bank or wall, and 2 of the soldiers, at the captain's command, made ready and fired. But with a deriding and loud laughter at them, she caught the bullets in her hand and chewed them, which was a stronger testimony than her treading water that she was the same that their imagination thought her to be. Then one of the men set his carbine against her breast and fired. But the bullet rebounded like a ball and narrowly missed the face of the shooter, which so outraged the gentleman that one drew out his sword and manfully run at her with all the force his strength had power to make. But it prevailed no more than did the shot. The woman, though still speechless, yet in a most contemptible way of scorn, still laughing at them, which did the more exhaust their fury against her life. Yet one amongst the rest had heard that piercing or drawing blood forth from the veins that crossed the temples of the head, it would prevail against the strongest sorcery and quell the force of witchcraft, which was allowed for trial. The woman, hearing this, knew then that the devil had left her, and her power was gone. Wherefore she began aloud to cry and roar, tearing her hair, and making a piteous moan, in which these words were expressed: "And is it come to pass that I must die indeed? Why, then his excellency, the Earl of Essex, shall be fortunate and win the field." After which no more words could be got from her, wherewith they immediately discharged a pistol underneath her ear, at which she straight sunk down and died, leaving her legacy of a detested carcass to the worms. Her soul we ought not to judge of, though the evils of her wicked life and death can scape no censor.
Your saga may vary.